Imagine this. It's the late 1500s on Africa's west coast. Powerful African kingdoms thrived thanks to trade. Spices, ivory, gold, textiles, and enslaved people were all traded among these African kingdoms. But a new danger arrived: Portugal. They wanted a colony on the west coast of Africa and to take control over the slave trade. Why slaves? Because colonies in the Americas, like Brazil, needed lots of labor. This growing demand for slaves made Portugal hungry for power in Africa. Before the arrival of Europeans, these other African kingdoms were trading partners with Ndongo and occasional political rivals. With the arrival of the Portuguese, old African allies turned into foes who began to attack Ndongo along with the Portuguese soldiers, searching for people to enslave. Rulers of Ndongo and the surrounding kingdoms had to adapt or be destroyed. In the heart of 17th century Africa, amidst the encroaching shadow of European colonialism, a formidable queen would emerge. Meet Queen Nzinga Mbande, also known as Ana de Sousa Nzinga Mbande, a warrior, a diplomat, a symbol of African resistance against the might of the Portuguese Empire. Her kingdom faced relentless invasion, but Nzinga was not one to bow down. This is the story of a queen who defied expectations, outmaneuvered her enemies, and left an enduring legacy of defiance. Born into the royal family of the Kingdom of Ndongo, Nzinga was destined, it seemed, for a life of privilege and power. Yet this was no ordinary princess. From her earliest years, she displayed a sharp intellect, a keen understanding of the intricacies of power, and a will to command respect and obedience. This is the story of Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, a tale of courage and resilience, of resourcefulness and resolve. It is a story of a woman who defied the odds, who stood up against the might of the Portuguese Empire, and who fought relentlessly for the freedom of her people. By 1624, King Mbande, Nzinga's brother, deeply depressed, ceded much of his power to his sister, Nzinga, and named her his successor. His subsequent death under mysterious circumstances, some suspecting suicide, others poisoning by Nzinga, triggered a power struggle. Nzinga acted swiftly, seizing royal emblems and eliminating her opposition to secure her position as Angola ruler. To remove her young nephew, a potential rival, she strategically married his powerful guardian Kasa and had the boy assassinated. Nzinga's path to power wasn't smooth. Her gender and her lineage through a slave wife were used by rivals to dispute her right to rule, despite her direct descent from the male royal line. Further, her attempts at diplomacy with the Portuguese, designed to regain lost territory, were seen by some as a betrayal of her brother's legacy. Nzinga maneuvered her way through the political landscape with a level of finesse that was extraordinary. She employed a blend of diplomacy, strategy, and sheer grit to stake her claim to the throne. Her ascension was met with resistance by some. The Portuguese governor de Sousa undermined Nzinga's authority in multiple ways. He refused to honor treaty terms by returning key slaves essential to the Ndongo power structure. Additionally, he demanded she become Portugal's vassal and pay tribute, a demand she adamantly refused. Worst of all, de Sousa worked to turn powerful Ndongo chiefs into Portuguese vassals, directly challenging Nzinga's sovereignty. Never one to be outmaneuvered, Nzinga strategically undermined the Portuguese by encouraging slaves to flee their plantations and join her kingdom, depriving the colony of vital labor. She cleverly deflected Portuguese demands for their return, claiming her kingdom held none. Nzinga's success emboldened local chiefs, who rallied to her cause, leading the Portuguese to fear a full-scale revolt. However, her tactics threatened the profits of both Portuguese traders and Ndongo nobles. The Portuguese responded by fomenting rebellion within her kingdom. In late 1625, they backed Haria Kiluanje, a rebellious chief with his own claim to the throne. Nzinga's attempt to crush his revolt failed, weakening her position and encouraging further dissent. While feigning negotiation with the Portuguese, Nzinga sought to buy time to rebuild her forces. But the Portuguese saw through her tactics, recognized Kiluanja as Ndongo's king, and formally declared war in March of 1626. The Portuguese saw this as an opportunity to intensify their aggression. A relentless onslaught followed, threatening the very existence of the kingdom. Nzinga, recognizing the imminent danger, was forced into a strategic retreat. She needed to regroup, to rethink, to strategize. Nzinga faced a full-blown Portuguese invasion. she regrouped her army and strategically retreated to islands on the Kwanza River. Despite initial battles, Nzinga's forces were ultimately defeated, forcing a harsh trek to escape her enemies. During this retreat, she made a critical decision: abandon most of her followers. This gamble paid off. The Portuguese, primarily focused on capturing runaway slaves, neglected to pursue Nzinga's depleted army. Nzinga, determined to protect what remained of her army and people, fled to Matamba and took several bold steps. First, she welcomed runaway slaves and even Portuguese-trained African soldiers, bolstering Matamba's military strength. Second, she implemented a unique military system called Quilombo. Young recruits dedicated themselves entirely to Matamba, raised and trained as a powerful communal fighting force. Finally, Nzinga never forgot her homeland. She actively encouraged rebellions within Ndongo, undermining the Portuguese puppet ruler's authority. The Portuguese, however, faced their own misfortune. Their chosen puppet king, Hari Akiluanje, succumbed to smallpox. They scrambled to replace him with Ngola Hari, another Ndongo nobleman. However, Ngola Hari's reign was short-lived and deeply unpopular. While some powerful nobles supported him, the Ndongo people saw him as a Portuguese pawn. A clear divide emerged within the kingdom. The commoners and lesser nobles rallied behind Nzinga, while many powerful nobles sided with Ngola Hari and the Portuguese. Despite the setbacks, Nzinga had not given up. She continued planning. She continued analysing the strengths and weaknesses of her enemies, studying their battle strategies, and adapting her own strategies accordingly. Her goal was clear: to reclaim her kingdom and restore peace and stability to her people. Exiled, but with her resolve unbroken, Nzinga sought allies and meticulously planned her resistance. Centuries ago, a storm brewed on the coast of West-Central Africa. European powers, hungry for land, resources and slaves, cast their eyes on the kingdom of Ndongo. Unbeknownst to them, they were about to encounter a force of nature, a brilliant queen who would fight tooth and nail to protect her people. Although she was of royal birth and came from a life of privilege, from the beginning, her life was not all about pomp and ceremony. Nzinga was also exposed to the political machinations and strategic alliances that formed the very core of her kingdom's survival. She learned early from her father, Quilombo Kia Kasenda, that power was not just a birthright, but a responsibility, a burden, and a weapon to wield with wisdom and courage. Her path would be fraught with challenges, more so than anyone could have expected of a royal princess. These were not merely the tribulations of ruling a kingdom or the intrigues of court politics. The challenges she was destined to face were far graver, reaching far beyond the boundaries of her kingdom. The Portuguese, with their superior firepower, had been encroaching on Ndongo. They came not as visitors, nor as diplomats keen on forging alliances. They came as conquerors, driven by an insatiable thirst for power, wealth, and the most abhorrent of all, slaves. Their ships, armed to the teeth, were a terrifying sight on the horizon, a foreboding harbinger of the violence and devastation that would follow. The Portuguese invasion was not a simple clash of cultures or a struggle for territorial dominance. It was an egregious assault on the very essence of Ndongo society, a blatant challenge to the long-standing traditions and values of Nzinga's people. It was a war that sought to replace the age-old system of mutual respect and collaboration with a pernicious regime of subjugation and exploitation. Nzinga's early exposure to the harsh realities of colonialism ignited her defiant spirit. She witnessed the devastation that befell her people. She saw the atrocities committed by the invaders. She felt the agony of her people's suffering in every fibre of her being. And in the midst of all this chaos and despair, a spark of defiance was kindled within her. Despite her outrage and the valiant fight she put up against the Portuguese and their puppet rulers, Queen Nzinga suffered serious setbacks. By the end of 1628, her army had been significantly reduced. Some historians estimate she was left with as few as 200 soldiers, which meant she was effectively exiled from her land, forced to leave her kingdom. Despite her exile, Nzinga refused to surrender. Seeking allies to bolster her depleted forces, she turned to a surprising source: Kasanji, a powerful Imbangala warlord and a historic enemy of Ndongo. Kasanji offered military support in exchange for marriage, and a relinquishing of her Ndongo symbol of power, the lunga bell. Nzinga, ever the pragmatist, agreed to these terms. Nzinga's integration into Imbangala society was swift and multifaceted. While the details of these practices remain debated, historical consensus suggests she participated in some of their rituals, including a blood oath ceremony and potentially even rituals involving infanticide. These practices were likely seen as necessary for her acceptance as a leader within their highly militaristic society. However, Nzinga wasn't simply assimilating. She cleverly blended her Mbundu heritage with Imbangala customs, creating a powerful new military identity. Additionally, she bolstered her ranks by offering freedom and land to escaped slaves and titles and rewards to exiled Ndongo people. Some historians suggest Nzinga was also drawn to the Imbangala emphasis on merit and religious devotion, which contrasted with the limitations placed on her by Ndongo's nobility. Leveraging her alliance with the Imbangala, Nzinga transformed her army, adopting their effective guerrilla tactics. By 1631, her forces were a formidable force, harassing the Portuguese. A Jesuit priest even compared her leadership to an Amazon queen. Nzinga's ambition didn't stop there. Between 1631 and 1635, she conquered the neighbouring kingdom of Matamba. Unlike Ndongo, Matamba embraced female leadership, offering Nzinga a more secure base. After defeating the previous queen, Nzinga incorporated Matamba's warriors and strategically settled exiled Ndongo people there. This new kingdom became a springboard for her ongoing fight against the Portuguese. Ruling Matamba, Nzinga saw an opportunity. She actively expanded the slave trade, using the profits to fund her war effort and counter Portuguese dominance. This economic competition defined the next decade as both sides vied for control of the lucrative trade. During this period, Nzinga's leadership style evolved. She adopted masculine titles and attire, even forming an all-female bodyguard. She blurred gender lines further by requiring her male advisors to be celibate and her male concubines to dress and act as women. By the late 1630s, Nzinga's influence reached far beyond Matamba. She strategically cut off neighbouring kingdoms from the Portuguese coast, gaining valuable control over the Quango River slave routes. Nzinga also courted the Dutch, who were expanding their presence in the region, forging a lucrative slave trade alliance with them. After the Dutch seized Luanda in 1641, crushing the Portuguese stronghold, Nzinga seized the opportunity. She quickly proposed a joint Afro-Dutch alliance against the Portuguese, although she worried about the growing power of her traditional rivals, the Congo Kingdom. The Dutch, eager for allies, sent envoys and soldiers to aid her fight. Nzinga's capital, Kavanga, boomed with 80,000 inhabitants while she reclaimed large parts of Ndongo. However, her expansion drew concern. Her invasion of a rebellious region of Congo angered the Congolese king Garcia II, and her former ally Kasanje feared her rising influence. He formed a rival alliance against her, invading Matamba but making little progress. Victories against the Portuguese, like the Battle of Ngoleme, solidified Nzinga's reputation and won over Ndongo nobles. This tribute from within Ndongo fueled the slave trade with the Dutch, further strengthening her military might. By 1644, she was on equal footing with Garcia II and considered the Portuguese's greatest threat in Africa. Nzinga's success was hard-won. Portuguese victories and unearthed spying by her now-captured sisters proved costly. In 1647, she decisively defeated the Portuguese at the Battle of Combi with Dutch aid. While Masangano remained elusive, Nzinga controlled much of her old kingdom, and the economic power of Matamba grew. The tide turned when a Portuguese expedition reclaimed Luanda in 1648. The Dutch forces, weakened by internal conflict, abandoned their alliance with Nzinga. Isolated and facing a reinforced Portuguese garrison, she retreated to Matamba. From then on, Nzinga focused on disrupting Portuguese expansion and fomenting discord among smaller kingdoms to defend her territory. After decades of relentless war, both Matamba and Portugal longed for peace. Talks began in 1651, fueled by Nzinga's recent return to Christianity and Portugal's pressure from its own war against Spain. These negotiations led to a treaty in 1656. Interestingly, Nzinga's embrace of Christianity evolved over time. After her initial conversion in 1623, She adopted some Christian practices, even granting freedoms to captured priests. This strategic relationship further developed when she used Spanish Capuchin missionaries as de facto diplomats, solidifying her ties with the Vatican. Peace demanded a new direction, and Nzinga focused on rebuilding her ravaged kingdom. While Ndongo was badly damaged, she revitalized Matamba as a trade hub, controlling the vital gateway to Central Africa's interior and strengthening her grasp of the slave trade. To replenish the population, she resettled former slaves and allowed her female warriors to bear children. Nzinga also sought recognition as a legitimate Christian kingdom, reforming her legal code and seeking alliances with European rulers. Post-war life brought social change to Nzinga's court. She replaced her wartime masculine persona with feminine fashions and luxuries, and even married her favorite concubine in a Christian ceremony. However, a growing concern over succession created a deep divide within her court. Nzinga saw the democratic and merit-based traditions of wartime as threats to the monarchy and sought to strengthen royal power. This alienated traditionalists and Imbangalans who favoured the old ways. Fearing a chaotic succession, Nzinga bypassed traditional Mbundu elections and appointed her sister Kambu as heir. However, Nzinga grew wary of Kambu's husband, Nzinga Amona. This skilled Imbangala warrior was gaining too much power, and his attachment to traditional ways threatened her vision of a stable Christian kingdom. Tragedy struck in October 1663. Nzinga fell gravely ill with a throat infection that ravaged her body. By December, the illness claimed her life as she passed away peacefully in her sleep on the 17th. Revered by many, Nzinga received a grand funeral that blended Catholic and Mbundu traditions. Ceremonies honouring her legacy were held across Matamba, even reaching Luanda, where both Portuguese and Mbundu people paid their respects. Queen Nzinga's defiance of Portuguese colonialism and her brilliant military and diplomatic strategies leave an enduring legacy of resistance and self-determination. For the people of Angola, she is a symbol of resilience, a cunning architect of national unity, and a champion of cultural preservation amidst conflict. Nzinga's political agility, evident in her strategic alliances and embrace of Christianity when necessary, exemplifies the complex leadership needed to navigate a tumultuous era. Her influence echoes beyond Angola. Nzinga's image as a powerful African woman warrior resonates across the African diaspora, inspiring resistance against oppression and championing the vital role of women in shaping history. Nzinga's legacy is a reminder of Africa's rich and often overlooked history. Engage with museums, cultural centres, or online resources that showcase the diverse contributions of African civilizations. Queen Nzinga's story is just one example of the countless incredible black leaders throughout history. Want to hear more about black excellence all year long? Hit that subscribe button and join the Black History Month year-round community. Leave a comment below telling us who else inspires you. And don't forget to like this video to show your love for black history.